It's a new year and I have some final thoughts. See what's going on in Iran right now? More importantly, do you see how our president is responding? Yeah, unlike his predecessor, President Trump is bold enough to support the protesters. And you'd think the whiny little snowflakes in this country would be all for it, but don't hold your breath. The last year has proven that if Trump does it, they hate it. Turns out the great American leftist resistance movement only seems to support protesting if it's anti-Trump or anti-American values. Go figure. See, the protesters in Iran, unlike our own fragile social justice warriors, are actually rising up for more rights, more freedom, more free speech, and more information. President Trump gets it and supports it. If Barack Obama had understood and supported that notion, maybe things would be different and better already. Yeah, don't forget, it was President Obama and his team that wouldn't fully support the Green Movement back in 2009. In true Obama fashion, he led from behind, tiptoed around the oppressive regime, cut deals under the table, and sent Iran a plane full of cash. Yeah, don't forget, it was the Obama administration that gave the $400 million plane load to the same Iranian regime that shoots its citizens and suppresses human rights. Now, why would President Obama do that? Oh, he was kissing up to Iranian leaders like, I don't know, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was famous for encouraging the slogan, "Death to America." Now, why did Obama want to curry favor with Iran? Oh yeah, to push through the nuclear deal as quickly as possible before the American people and our allies had time to fully understand how bad it actually was. President Obama and lackeys like former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, remember him? The one who famously boasted about duping starry-eyed journalists? Yeah, their puppet strings played us the whole time. So flash forward to Iran today. Now President Trump must clean up this mess like he's had to do with President Obama's other diplomatic endeavors. Oh, and by the way, where is the almighty UN in all of this? Awfully vocal against Israel and Jerusalem, but quiet when it comes to actual human rights violations. Typical. Enough is enough. Why are we rewarding Iran for mountains of human rights violations? Why are we giving them any relief whatsoever? Where do you think that money has gone and is going? Remember the slogan, "Death to America"? Yeah, that's where it's going. See, ISIS might be on its heels, but Iran is up to bat, and how we deal with them will set the tone for years to come. Obama failed the Iranian people and gave the regime a get-out-of-jail-free, go-build-nukes card. Look, it's not easy to turn an 8-year American apology tour back into an American butt-kicking tradition, but our president is working on it, and in 2018, he will get it done. Those are my final thoughts. From LA, God bless, and take care.
Let me ask you about this letter here from Representative Nunes. Putting that deadline on things, how does that change the equation right now? Will they meet it?
Well, I think the letter was great, and I applaud Chairman Nunes for doing that. I think that deadline needs to be enforceable. Trish, we've been doing this for months and months, asking very simple questions about the genesis of this investigation, about how the dossier came into the FBI's possession, whether the FBI paid for the dossier, whether they used it to get surveillance on any Trump associates. And those are all very easy questions to actually answer. And yet we've been met with resistance after resistance after resistance. So I think they have until next week to do it. And then if not, I think the House is going to have to move on to different measures in order to force compliance.
Congressman, what do you think that resistance is about?
It's hard to tell. I mean, you have a lot of people in there who've been a part of the bureaucracy for a long time. I mean, to me, the questions are very easy to answer. If you said, of course we didn't use the dossier, then you would just say that. And I think the reason is probably that some of the answers to these questions are going to call further into question the behavior of some of the people involved at the very highest levels of both the Clinton and Russia investigations, people like Peter Strzok. So we need answers to those questions, and I think what they're doing by resisting, but then actually leaking certain facts to the media. There was just an article in the New York Times yesterday where they're leaking about this Papadopoulos, which actually conflicts with previous stories and is not anything that anyone's been able to say under oath on the record to us. You look at that and say, okay, you're not willing to answer Congress's questions under oath, but you'll leak things to the media? That is not the way this is supposed to work.
Well, you think about, frankly, who was running the FBI, and James Comey sort of leaker-in-chief, if you would, himself. I still remember being absolutely stunned during his testimony when he admitted that he was the one who actually leaked things to his friend at Columbia, who could then in turn leak it to the New York Times. I mean, shocking to me, because it tells you, perhaps, Congressman, a little bit about the culture there. And I guess one of the things I'm amazed by is, if they're so into leaking, how come we haven't heard more about this so-called collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians? Why haven't they been able to find anything, to pinpoint anything to leak to the media?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if there was any evidence of collusion, that would have been leaked months and months ago. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. But it's very, very frustrating to see. A lot of times they will refuse to answer Congress's questions because they'll say, well, you know, it's classified. We're not sure that we can do it in this setting. But then they'll leak classified information to the media. So it's just very, very frustrating process. But you're exactly right. I think there has not been evidence of collusion. And one of the kind of data points that best supports that is, I think if there was evidence of that, I think the press would have gotten it by now.
All right. So let's go back to the Trump dossier for a moment, because this was put together, as everyone knows by now, by a firm, hired a sort of hit job kind of firm, to dig up dirt on someone as Fusion GPS, and they were brought in and eventually down the road employed in part by folks close to Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and bankrolled by the Democrats. I guess the big question that we have to ask is, was Russia deliberately trying to mess with us, with the United States of America, and our whole election process? And did they deliberately feed false information to Christopher Steele, the British spy that was hired to compile this dossier? I think that deserves a lot of answers. And the scary thought is that possibly the FBI used this thing to then get FISA warrants.
Well, we know for sure that Steele was getting information from Foreign Service Bureau sources in Russia. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. We're trying to figure out whether he actually paid for that information, that it's possible that he did do that. And so you're right. You have the Democrats paying. Now, they funneled the money through a Perkins Co. law firm,
Correct,
who then paid Fusion to try to camouflage this. With the lid's been blown off on that. We now know this was the Democrats' money. Steele is actively working with Russians. And yes, I think it's without question that he was fed a lot of disinformation. I don't even know that any of these Russian sources could have dreamed that this thing would have been used the way it has been, potentially. And so if that was their aim, I think it was successful. But they bring this dossier back, and this thing is basically just a bunch of garbage. And so if that was relied upon, that is something that's very, very important. And there's a very easy answer to that question, Trish. We just need to get it.
You know, you say it's a bunch of garbage, and I'd encourage people to actually check it out, because I can tell you, just reading through the thing, it actually reads like some kind of tabloid piece of fiction from an opposition party. I mean, even the way it's written is, to me, quite odd. If a spy is gathering intelligence, you wouldn't think that they would compile it and put it into a dossier that looked anything like that one. And of course, this has been floating, Congressman, around many journalist organizations, and no one touched it. No one published it, because no one saw it as authentic, and no one could verify a darn thing in there. And yet, our own FBI somehow is possibly taking this as some kind of gospel that they then think that they need to, you know, issue warrants on people and eavesdrop, etc.
Well, yeah, and remember how the dossier eventually became public. Comey briefed President-elect Trump January 6th of 2017, and then lo and behold, a couple hours later, CNN, they didn't want to print the dossier because they knew it was false. But what they did was they leaked the existence of the meeting about the dossier. So that was the way that got into the bloodstream. And there was only a handful of people who knew about that meeting, including James Clapper, who was the head of national intelligence under Barack Obama. So this whole thing with this dossier and how the government either did use it or may have used it, it really does stink to high heaven.
So when people talk about the deep state, is this what they're referring to?
You know, I draw a distinction between the rank and file of the FBI, who I think if you look across our government, some of these FBI agents are as good as anybody in any agency of government. When I served in Iraq back in '07, you had FBI agents out in places like Fallujah, Ramadi, risking their lives. I think the problem has been with a relatively small number of people who've been high up in the agency, both in Justice Department and in the FBI, and these happen to be the people who were the driving forces behind both the Hillary email investigation and then the Trump collusion Russia investigation. And I think anybody who misbehaved needs to be held accountable, but at a minimum, we need to know what all these people did and how all this information was handled.
You know, I think that's probably, perhaps for Americans, the most frustrating thing of all. In other words, everybody has questions. It's been proven that the Russians interfered in the election. And by the way, there was information this week going back to 2016, of course, when the Obama administration knew that they were trying to interfere in the election. And for whatever reason, the Obama administration wasn't so concerned then, maybe because they thought it would benefit Hillary Clinton. That aside, people want answers. Nobody wants the Russians interfering with anything, and we deserve these answers on both sides. But it has become so politicized. How do you get away from that, Congressman? Does Robert Mueller need to step down?
Well, look, I think a lot of the questions that I have predate Mueller's appointment. I have problems with Mueller being appointed simply because I thought it was a counterintelligence investigation, not a criminal investigation. I think Rod Rosenstein made a mistake by imposing a criminal prosecutor on this because we didn't really have evidence of a crime. And so what a prosecutor is going to do, they're going to try to find evidence of a crime. But that's not really the way you want criminal investigations to go. You want there to be an identified crime, and then you try to build the case. And that basic central crime was never there in this case. But in terms of the partisanship, I got to tell you, Trish, I'm dizzy with how Russia is handled by the Democrats. A couple years ago, Obama was refusing to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. They were trying to do a reset. The Democrats lauded that. They viewed guys like me, who are more of the Reagan school, that's tough on Russia, as kind of throwbacks to the Cold War. They criticized Mitt Romney in 2012. Now, all of a sudden, because they're using it against Trump, they're so concerned about Russia. I think we should be concerned about them, but I think a lot of this stuff has reeked of politics from the day that election happened last year.
I'm glad you said that, Representative DeSantis, because I have really questioned why it is that we suddenly wanted to be friends with Russia while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, but now Russia is the sworn enemy. What I would say is that we knew all along, and you go back to the Bush era, we knew that Russia was a threat. This was out there. Condoleezza Rice was a Russian scholar. They knew, and for whatever reason during the Obama administration, they decided to ignore that. The Mitt Romney point is a very good one. Congressman DeSantis, Happy New Year to you. Thank you. I'll see you in 18.
Happy New Year.